Hi, and welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio, where Falcor, Scott, Eva, and I are here today with Kevin Corcoran. And I have to tell you, the first time Kevin came across my radar is because of Steve Rohr. Now, you guys might remember when we talked to Steve Rohr about communication. Well, as soon as I looked at this sheet and some information and talked to Steve about Kevin, there was no question. This was a perfect person to come join us on the Voice of Bold Business Radio. And you're here live with us on Facebook live stream, as well as YouTube live stream. And I have to admit, we are loving this new concept, even though we're still working out some kinks here and there. And to some, I'm thinking about this because today's concept, today's topic is all about conflict, the midpoint between connection and disconnection. And that conflict can show up for us anywhere. You know, when we're doing this kind of thing in the behind the scenes, it's technology dissonance that can create conflict. Yet, we're not talking about that today. We could also talk about any conflict we have with our favorite pair of pajamas or the food that we like to eat or our desire to, leave behind or avoid exercise or anything that we love to hate. We're really probably not talking about that either, but you never know when it comes to the Voice of Bold Business Radio. We're talking about conflict in terms of connection between people. And I'm excited to introduce you to Kevin Corcoran, and he goes by Kevin Corcoran Jr. He's a speaker, author, adventurer. He also holds an MA in communication. He teaches for National University, San Diego State University, and most recently he has published his first book. With topics ranging from communication and leadership to mindfulness and teamwork, Kevin has worked closely with Apple, Sony, TEDx, Red Bull, Coldwell Banker, and the American Red Cross. Now, you don't get to meet him just yet. You know the drill. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
All right, Kevin, I want to know, how's it going today?
It's going very well.
I'm glad to hear it. You'll notice I introduced Falcor again, too. He showed up in last week's conversation. And so I just kept him around. He is the luck dragon from the Neverending Story. And
I'm definitely familiar with Falcor.
Brought back a lot of memories when I found this little guy. And so, I was like, when it comes to technology, I need a little luck. So we'll see. Maybe he can help us out some. Here and there. Now, it's freezing cold here today in Boulder, Colorado. How is it? How's the weather there?
So if I look out my window, it's looking to be probably 75 and sunny.
75 and sunny. I'm so jealous.
But I have to say, I was in Wisconsin about maybe 2 weeks ago, and it was the coldest I had ever been in my entire life. It got down to -5. To the point where the car we were renting wouldn't start. And then once you got it to start and you were driving, it would just it wouldn't shift gears. So it would just kind of go so it's nice to be back in the warm weather.
I tell you, and it's really funny because weird things like that, right? Whether it be weather or technology or who knows what, we have these places where when we interact with other people, what happens? We get conflict. And I think we should just start right there. Not necessarily about conflict around those things specifically, but conflict in general. I want to know from you, how do you define conflict and tell us what causes it?
Yeah, so conflict it's really easiest to think about it as just a disagreement. If you think in terms of any time that people talk about conflict management or conflict resolution or having conflict in a relationship or having conflict with yourself and what you want and what you envision and your actions and all that, it's really just a disagreement. So when you have a conflict in a relationship, it's not about yelling and arguing and fighting and screaming and kicking. That's not what it is. A conflict is simply having a disagreement. And there's really only 3 reasons that it comes up, and that's having incompatible goals. So when one person wants one thing, another person wants another thing, That's a conflict technically. Insufficient resources, so not having enough of something that you both want, or last but not least is interference, which could be, anything. Maybe you think that the weather is a possible interference for the connection that you have today. Like we were just talking about, one of you sees the weather as a good thing, one of you sees the weather as a bad thing. That's interference between the two of you.
Okay. And and it's amazing how quickly things can change, right?
Yes.
Here we are in relationship with somebody, and maybe that we are in a relationship with somebody. That could be our boss, that could be our colleague, that could be our significant other, that could be our dog, a neighbor, whomever, right? This concept of in relationship. And it's amazing how, listening to you, I'm like, oh yeah, interference at first glance, interference seems like the most common cause of a disagreement where conflict can occur. In your research, do you concur with that? Is that an assumption on my part? Tell us more about that.
So the two main ones are interference and incompatible goals, which makes sense because it's something as simple as, okay, so let's say it's with your boss and your boss says, hey, I want to take you out to lunch. Let's go to sushi. But if you don't like sushi, now you have an incompatible goal, which is a perceived interference. So they overlap quite a bit. But yeah, definitely. So having interference between you and another person, whether it's, the food you want to eat, or if you're in a romantic relationship and one of you wants to go to the movies, but one wants to go play mini golf. Well, those are incompatible goals. You can't do both at the same time. I mean, I guess you could, but but most often in most cities, maybe if you go to a more progressive city, they might have like a giant movie screen as you're playing. But, more often than not, we're going to have those things come up in friendship, in co-working relationships, in romantic relationships, in friendships. You're going to have different wants, different needs, and those are going to come up at the same time. And that's where conflict starts to happen. And again, conflict, I think, gets a bad connotation, and people think of it as, like yelling, screaming, very aggressive. But conflict, very simply, is disagreement. It's not good or bad. It's just how it's managed.
It's just how it's managed. And what does that actually mean?
So conflict is, maybe this this might be something that people don't want to hear, but conflict is a guarantee in a relationship. Again, whether it's romantic, friendship, co-working, whatever it is, there's going to be conflict because you're bringing two interdependent people together and individuals have different wants, different needs, different values, different thoughts, different worldviews, different backgrounds. So at some point, there's going to be a conflict, right? And that's not the bad part. The bad part is, if it's bad, is how you handle it. It's how you manage it. So some people fight, right? Some people fight to win, and that's called competitive fighting. And that's one of the conflict styles. And that, when you fight to win, so let's come back to our example of you want to go to the movies, but your partner wants to go play mini golf. Well, if you say, you know what, you're stupid, you're dumb, I'm going to go to the movies, you're either going to come with me or you're not, and that's the end of it. Okay, well, that's not healthy, right? So it's not the fact that you want to do different things that's the problem. It's how you manage the fact that you want to do those different things. I think so just last thing I'll say here is that one of my favorite quotes is that it's not the way that people manage conflict is more important than the frequency or the reason for the conflict.
Say that one more time.
Yeah, the way that people manage conflict is more important than the frequency of the conflict or the reason for the conflict.
So now we're talking a little bit about, are we reacting or are we responding?
Exactly.
And you're right. I'm totally happy. And it's interesting because that you say that. Now here I've got all these things going through my head, right? The conversations I've had in the last 24 hours, the conversations I've had in the last week or month or quarter, okay? And I'm like, okay. And if I look at that and I say, yeah, I can tell when I reacted and it went poorly, or I can tell when I responded and it went a little less poorly, or it was still difficult but was all right. And then I'm thinking about how many, because some people that are listening to us will go, the only way I know things are okay is that when we have zero conflict. And zero conflict is the measure with which they are, they're looking at the success of a relationship, whatever that relationship is. And that surprises me because I don't work like that. And every time I hear about that, or somebody is indicating that to me in the language that they're using, or they come right out and say it, I'm always surprised. And I'm like, how can you not have conflict? How can you strive for none? And so hearing you say this, I'm like, okay. And what would you say to those people? Is there something underlying that?
Yeah, I think you're going to love this. So there's actually a lot of research that points to the healthiest relationships. And this is research on romantic relationships. So the healthiest romantic relationships actually have about 1 to 3 mild disagreements, which again, we can call conflict, 1 to 3 conflicts per week, and 1 to 2 bigger disagreements or bigger conflicts per month. And, there's a lot of theories about why. And my thoughts on this is that if you're not having conflict, then there's probably some oppression of authenticity happening in the relationship, because conflict comes from sharing your wants, sharing your needs, sharing your values, sharing those things about yourself with someone else, and then the disagreement happening. So if there's no disagreement happening, then my guess is you're probably not voicing all the things that are, not all the things, but you're probably not voicing things that you want or things that you need. And you're probably living more of a silent life. And again, then there's a bunch of research on, when we stay silent, we lack vulnerability. Without vulnerability, we lack connection. And why are we in relationship in the first place? For connection. So in order to experience more of that connection, we really need to have that conflict, because that means we're both being authentic with each other.
Interesting. This actually comes up to a conversation I was having with a longtime friend of mine who, I can't share any of the details of that conversation. That is not PG friendly for this show. Nonetheless.
Okay.
Nonetheless, it's really interesting because it would probably show up in other ways, right? So here I am. I'm a very tactile person, and I like touch. So when I come towards somebody, when I first introduce them, I always have both hands out, and I'm going to grab both hands when I shake somebody's hand, or I'm going to put my hand on their shoulder to shake a hand. And it's amazing to me that when I put my hand on somebody's shoulder as I'm shaking their hand, how many of them skip the handshake and I actually get a hug, which I like because I prefer that. But I also recognize that there's this need for space, the way that how we each show up. And I don't wish to create dissonance or disconnection with somebody because I'm overly, whatever they might put words around that particular thing to be. And I think you can tell, this is totally off topic, however, it popped into my brain about the different types of hugs there are. So you were talking about the types of agreements or disagreements that somebody has. And the less disagreements are when that conflict is basically non-existent, something isn't right. And I think it shows up in other ways. It might show up in the way people hug. It might show up in the way they actually show closeness or connection between people, the nonverbal cues. Is that your experience?
So so everybody has a different preference for touch. Mm-hmm. No matter what, according to the science of space or proxemics, there are basically 4 different spaces that we can be in. One of those is intimate space. Now, if you are a stranger with someone and you give them a hug, you have immediately gone into intimate space with them. If in their past they've had bad experiences with intimacy, or they are fearful of intimacy, or maybe they're preoccupied with intimacy, they might have different reactions to the people who have a very secure attachment or relationship with intimacy. So for someone like me, I went from a dismissive kind of relationship style where, going through high school, going through college, I was working a lot. I was playing music professionally, and I was doing so much that I kind of derailed and thought of myself as more valuable than the relationships that I was in. And over time, as I learned more about communication, learned more about relationships, dated more people, experienced more people, I've developed and built more of a secure attachment or a secure relationship style, which is to say, now I see that I'm valuable, but so is everyone else. Every single person I come across is very, 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 very extremely valuable to the world. And so for me, a hug now is a great thing. I would, put someone in front of me, they give me a hug, I'd be happy to hug them back. Put me back, 10 years ago, people would give me a hug and I'm like, why are you touching me? Like, I don't need to be hugged right now. I don't know why this is happening. You've entered my intimate space and I only see myself as being in this intimate space. So definitely 100% the way that where we position ourselves with other people matters, as well as how we touch other people. There is a safe spot, but even with that safe spot, there are still people who are not in love with being touched. So the safest spot to touch somebody is actually right here between the elbow and the shoulder, lightly on the upper arm. That's actually the research has found that's the safest place to touch someone who is new or a stranger who is unfamiliar with you.
Interesting. And now, we've like gone all over the place here, and we're going to stay right here and come back out, I think, back to these other topics. And maybe we won't. We might find so much other stuff to speak on. So we've talked about conflict, what it is, what causes it. We talked about the 3 ways that disagreement happens typically. And we've also talked about proximity and intimacy and all kinds of other different types of things about how conflict happens. And it comes down to, you had said it before, the way, the management of it, the response to it. So for somebody who's listening to us and going, really, they're talking about hugs? We know they're like you 10 years ago.
That's exactly right.
And that would be something that they may inadvertently be alienating people just by the way that they're showing up in space. Now, the other is also true. Here I come into a room and I totally don't mind putting myself out there for this one. If you wherever your boundary is, I'm going to find it and I'm going to meet you there, just in my energy and in my presence. And so you see that, and it, that can also not be so good sometimes. And so we're talking about management, and we're talking about the way that we approach how we look at an interaction with another person. What's your first suggestion for somebody to take a look back and go, how do we do this a little quick self-evaluation so we can kind of find out how we react to others and how we react?
So I think what we're starting to get into is the different ways that so I'm going to try to use the non-scientific language here, but this is all about the psychology of attachment styles. There's really 4 different ways that we value ourselves and value others. So the first is, it's called secure, but it's really the confident attachment style. And it's all about seeing yourself as valuable, but seeing other people as valuable as well. So if you walk into a room and you think, cool, I'm here, that's good, I'm worth something, I'm worthwhile. And you look at everybody else in the room and you're going, wow, that person's interesting, that person's valuable, that person looks great. You're probably more of a confident kind of a person, or a secure kind of person. The second would be, it's called preoccupied. And this is the idea that you cling to the value of other people so much that you don't even have value unless you have other people around you. So this is bringing back this idea, you walk into the room, you look at all these people in the room and you're going, that person's amazing, that person's incredible, I wish I could be them, I wish I could be like them, I wish I could be something else. I find my value from the people around me. As you might imagine, that's when you get into clinging relationships where, people can't be by themselves. They want to be with someone else and they kind of attach, right? That's why it's called an attachment style. Again, it's not that if that's you're listening to this right now and you're like, oh my gosh, that's me when I walk into a room. You're not doomed. It's not a problem. It's not inherently bad. Becoming aware of the fact that you are predispositioned toward that style is the first step. So just recognizing, okay, that's probably me. I walk in, I don't really think too much of myself, but I think greatly of all these other people. Maybe I should start to think about that a little more, pay more attention to it. And the nice thing about attachment styles and what we're talking about right now is they are completely adaptable. So as you become aware, and as you become aware every time it happens, you can start to make decisions about how you think in that moment or how you act in that moment. So coming back to the third attachment style, we have dismissive. And this is what I mentioned earlier of where I kind of came from. And this is where you walk into a room and you're going, all right, I'm here. I'm the party. I'm the important one. Everyone else here. Okay, great. Who wants to come talk to me? That's a bit of an over exaggeration, but really the idea is that you dismiss the value of other people because you only care about the value of yourself. So, when I was younger, I wanted to move to a different country, live somewhere else. I didn't care about being in a relationship with somebody. I could write people off very easily. Like if someone, I'm a very loyal person. So if someone did anything to dissect that loyalty or kind of break that loyalty, I would just very easily go, okay, we're done. I don't need you. I don't want you. I can move on and find other people. But like I said, over time, noticing that, several times, you start to realize that's not really like I'm losing out on relationship with other people because I'm dismissing them, right? So that's the dismissive attachment style. And again, becoming aware of it each time you walk into the room or each time you're in a relationship, becoming more aware of it, you can start to make changes to how you act or how you think or how you behave. And the last one, so the fourth attachment style is fearful. This is when we don't see value in ourselves. We don't see value in other people. This is where we don't even go to the room. Like we are afraid to even enter the room. Like, so there's the door and we're thinking, oh man, I don't really want to go inside. There's gonna be a bunch of people. I don't really want to talk to anyone. I don't really feel that good about myself. So this is like, you don't even enter the room. None of these, like I said before, mean that you're doomed or mean that you're a bad person or mean that you suck at relationship. I teach a relational communication class, and almost every single day I remind them okay, what we're talking about, right? You are not doomed. I promise. You can become aware and make changes. You're not stuck. So I think that's the best part about this.
Yeah, it's easy to self-diagnose and to take at least become aware and have some reaction to that and get overly sensitive or shut down or who knows what. And I'm listening to the 4 attachment styles and looking at my relationships just in life, right? It doesn't matter who they're with. I'm like, oh, I know where I'm at. And look who I tend to attract. Okay, no wonder I have conflict. And so another piece would be, not only can we just be aware, we can see, so who are we attracted to? What conversations are we having? How are we showing up in those conversations? And then recognizing, is there a pattern of who we tend to be drawn to or find easy to speak to or run to because we know we are going to be dismissed or whatever, right? It doesn't matter. And so I find that interesting because I'm all about self-awareness. And I don't know, I know we've talked a lot about what you're doing these days, and we talked some about what I do. And I had a client very recently who was late to the beginning of a very intensive day together. And finally, I sent a text and I said, where are you? Do you need anything? I want to make sure you're safe. You're late enough. I'm noticing. And I got a text back, I'm in the parking lot. And I was like, really? Okay. So thinking, and then I got another text. I said, are you going to join me soon? And they said, I don't know yet.
Wow.
And I mean, so here I'm thinking about this, and there was this, they had already done amazing work. I'm going to go do this intensive day. I'm going to look at things in my business that I'm not going to like. I'm going to really have to face some of this dysfunction. And they did all of that. They came through all of that and couldn't walk through the door. And so, and that's an internal conflict more than a conflict between people, because they already felt safe. They already felt comfortable. They felt aware enough to go, yeah, let's do this. But then that, for whatever reason, that particular step. And that's really when we need our guts the most, don't we?
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, and so many people have said this, and it's so true. We are our own critic. Like, we're our own worst critic. So I think that the internal conflict that most of us experience at some point is really just disharmony so we want something to be a certain way, but then it's not that way. So we sit in our car and we're like, okay, I want to be inside right now. I want to be making these moves that are big. They're going to be challenging. I want to do those things. But what am I doing right now? I'm sitting in my car, not moving. That's internal conflict. That's a disagreement between two parts of you, which sounds strange because a lot of people think that, our mind is one thing, but there's so many aspects to mind, and, the ego, the id, so our identity, which isn't static at all. Our identity shifts every single day, and actually every single group that we're in. It's called the assimilation effect. But every single time that we're in a different group or a different setting, our identity slightly shifts. It's adaptation at its very best. It's what we do best as humans. So when we're at work, we can put on a filter with our language. We can make sure that the topics that we talk about they range a certain spectrum. But the moment we get off work and we hang out with our friends, our identity shifts slightly. I'm not saying that we change who we are and that we're all multiple personalities or anything like that. What I'm saying is that our identity bends. And it depends on the setting, the environment, the people that we're with, our mood, our emotion, our transient states, our state of mind. All of those things can bend our identity slightly. Even something as simple as not having enough food. So, and I experienced this last weekend. I went camping up in Big Sur with my fiance and a close friend of ours. And at one point, I was getting pretty grumpy. And I don't spend a lot of time being grumpy. I think it's a waste of time. And I meditate every single day. So I'm very aware of how I'm feeling a lot. And so I was kind of sitting there and I was like, I don't want to do anything. They were like, let's go check out this beach. And I was like, I don't really want to. And finally, one of them was like, what have you eaten today? And I was like, oh yeah, I should probably eat. And so I ate some food. 5 minutes later, I felt way better. And, whether you want to call that your identity or not, how I was responding to the situation was completely dependent on the food that I had, the mood I was in, the emotions I was having. And so all of that is to say that, I think internal conflict really comes from disharmony between what we want, how we're acting, the emotions that we're having, all the different parts that happen inside of us every single day when there's disagreement between those parts.
And then we just compound it exponentially, because when we have internal disagreement from all those different things, and now we're in relationship with somebody doing something, and there's an external disagreement, it will affect, we revert back to what's comfortable. We revert back to what we feel is safe. We revert back to something. And I know the more work you do, right? So you said you meditate every day. Personally, the more work that I do, the more likely it is I will not snap back to really old ingrained patterns of safety. However, every once in a while, I get surprised and I do something and I'm like, ooh, what just happened? And what was the cause of that? Because I would go not just back a little bit in my awareness, I'd go all the way back to something from when I was really little and how I responded, as I was being raised, living with parents and that kind of thing. And it's like, what just happened? And just knowing that was enough for me to go, all right, well, this is apparently really uncomfortable. And I'm okay with that because I like chaos. I like uncomfortableness. However, and that's okay. It's a place I play. Love it. However, most people aren't like that. And there's this concept of comfort that we move toward, right? Then whether it's internal or external conflict, there's this place that we can get to, and then we want to be comfortable. And I know the book that you just wrote, I want to hear about your book a little bit. And I also want you to define this concept of what a comfort zone actually is so we can find the edges of our own.
Yeah. So the book that I just put out, it's called Where the Magic Happens. And it's all about the science and then some stories that I have of challenging your comfort zone. Because I believe that if you can become comfortable with being uncomfortable, then you really become unstoppable. The reason why is because you're going to experience discomfort at some point in your life, whether it's every single day, every single hour, every single week, whatever it is, it's going to happen because life doesn't happen controlled. Like life is chaotic. There's a whole theory behind it, chaos theory. It's just mind blowing. Everything's happening all the time. And the whole idea of like a butterfly flapping its wings could cause, a tornado on the other side of the world. Small, tiny things can have big reach and big impact. So when we go through life, there's going to be some discomfort. why I believe in purposefully challenging our comfort zones and doing it intentionally for a specific reason is you're controlling your discomfort. You are controlling failure. You're controlling things that you know are going to happen in the future so that you can practice. So when it comes time that it actually happens, you've already been there. You've already experienced some of those same things internally. So I like to think of comfort challenges as something we do on purpose to make ourselves just a little bit uncomfortable. I'm not saying if you have a fear of heights, you should go jump out of planes. That's absolutely not it at all.
Good.
So,
I'm glad.
Yeah, right. Disclaimer. What I am saying is, if there's a certain food you don't like, but you haven't tried it in 5 years and you're attached to this idea that 5 years ago you ate a steamed mussel and you just didn't really like it, why not give it another shot on purpose, even though you know it's going to make you just slightly uncomfortable? Or something like saying hi to a stranger. And I'm not, again, a disclaimer, I'm not saying go up to the person with the long dark trench coat who looks sketchy. I'm saying when you see someone who's just walking by, they look like they could maybe use a hello, something like that, just say, hey, nice to see you, right? And it's those little things that for a lot of us, they're really uncomfortable. But if we purposefully do it, if we intentionally put ourselves into these comfort challenges, what we're doing is creating a laboratory for experimenting with discomfort. And once we can get into that kind of practice of getting used to discomfort, then when it comes up when we're not doing it on purpose, so let's say we're driving and someone cuts us off on the freeway, because that happens to everybody at some point. We're driving, someone cuts you off. Well, you didn't design that discomfort, but now you're experiencing it, you're feeling it. Well, you're going to feel some of the same things you felt when you purposely took that steamed mussel and put it in your mouth, even though you really didn't want to. It's kind of that like, oh, no, I'm uncomfortable. I don't like this. So someone cuts you off. Now you've had the experience to practice with that. And the only way to get good at anything is to do it and keep doing it.
Okay. And it's interesting to hear you speak about those things because there's so much other stuff that comes to mind, whether at one point in time I was a professional flute player. Okay. And so same thing, to get that good, you had to do these certain things and you did them over, and you did it first. You had to figure out if you didn't like them or not. Then you had to figure out how to get okay with it. Then you had to figure out how to just keep at it and work on the nuances of it. And then whatever situation you find yourself in, what happens? You can come up, you adapt, and you show up. And what I hear with this concept of purposefully challenging where our comfort zone is specifically can relate to our interaction with somebody else, going back to this connection or disconnection. Because if we're only wrapped up in what's going on and you said disharmony internally, internal conflict, then we've got this concept of, well, if I've got that under control and it's like, oh, good, I feel this thing coming on again. I can still handle, I can still show up. I can still have the intention to make good on something that might be uncomfortable between me and another.
Yeah. So I think that, to bring back or to connect conflict with comfort zone. So conflict is uncomfortable. Like having a disagreement with somebody is uncomfortable. Having any kind of conflict is uncomfortable. So if we practice being more comfortable with being uncomfortable, then we can technically better manage conflict because we're used to that discomfort that comes up. And so then once we better manage conflict, we have a stronger relationship, just like the research points out, which the healthiest relationships have well-managed conflict that happens, regularly. So to kind of go back through that, conflict is discomfort in a relationship. It's uncomfortable. To have the experience of disagreement, it is uncomfortable. But if we've already practiced getting more familiar or more comfortable with that discomfort, then we could do a better job of being in that moment of conflict. And once we're better at doing the conflict right then, we then have stronger connection or stronger relationships.
Okay. Everybody, did you hear that? It's only by having experiences that we knowingly put ourselves in that make us uncomfortable that allows us to know what uncomfortable is for us, and then be able to use that to become unstoppable. I loved that you used that at the beginning of the program. Unstoppable.
Well, and who doesn't want to be unstoppable, right?
Exactly, which is why we're paying attention to this show today, everybody who's listening and watching. And you are listening to the Voice of Bold Business Radio, where we're talking about conflict, the midpoint between connection and disconnection. Now, I'm going to ask you kind of a twist, right? We're talking about uncomfortable. We know what that feels like. We're talking about disharmony. We know what that feels like. So we have a really good sense of what disconnection feels like and our experience of it, or how it looks to us. Well, how do we know when we're really connected?
Ooh, that's a power question. So, I mean, there's multiple different ways to go about this and to think about this. But I think at its simplest form, when we feel connected, we feel at harmony with. And so what I mean by that is when you feel like things are just going well, and you feel, it's almost like the state of flow. Like it's this connection is this strange thing, because it's really difficult to pull yourself above it and go, wow, I'm really connected right now. Because the moment you do that, you're technically disconnecting. And so connection is really this flow or this state of harmony in relationship, or, you know, with yourself if it's internal. But I think if I were to say it as simply as I possibly can, connection equals harmony. And so when you feel like things are just working, and you feel like, you know, maybe you feel love or happiness or satisfaction, joy, pleasure, whatever it is, and you just feel it, and you don't even have to pay attention. It's just there. There it is. You're like, wow, things are going great, cool, awesome. That's connection, right? And it's not something that we have to pull back and go, am I really connected right now? Because the moment you ask yourself that question, again, you're kind of disconnecting. You're kind of pulling yourself out of it. So I think it's something that we can't think about too much. It's something that we have to experience.
When you were talking about the four psychology styles of confident, preoccupied, dismissive, and fearful, I was like, oh yeah, I got some of all of those. But there is one that stands out. And, you know, and of course I am thinking about my husband, and I'm like, oh yeah, he's got all of those. Actually, that's not true. He's got one or two. Right? So I'm like, okay, no problem. And then I'm thinking about the people on my team, and I'm like, oh, I can see how my perception of how they're showing up, which means we have to go back to that laboratory and put that data in. And then as we're having conversations that are intentional and supportive and working to challenge not only myself, but them as well, to raise what we're doing with the Voice of Bold Business Radio as an example, I can be on the lookout for those, because that everything that we've been talking about before, how we're showing up here, how we show up to discomfort, how we show up to connection or disconnection, comes from our past experience. And so it's this concept of conditioning that I hear you talking about. It basically like an exercise regimen around comfortness that will allow us to look at those relationships and see how can we supportively, safely, and have the most connection possible, and still allow for there to be some conflict now and again, because that's where the growth happens. I really think growth happens in the conflict piece, not the flow piece.
So I love the idea of saying like an exercise regimen, because so we can go to the gym and we can put ourselves in the discomfort of working out so that we can build our physical body, right? Similarly, we can sit down, close our eyes, and kind of go to the mental gym. And I like to think about that as like meditation, self-reflection, breathing techniques, yoga, you know, that kind of space. That's really the mental gym, where, you know, you close your eyes, put yourself into the discomfort of your own mind, and kind of build your mental muscle. Well, the comfort zone and putting yourself, the comfort challenges are really about building your resilience muscle. So by purposely putting yourselves in the gym of everyday life and, you know, putting yourself into these little bit of uncomfortable situations, on the other side of it, you've built a muscle of resilience. You've built an ability to adapt and overcome things in the future that are going to come up. So you're really just practicing for future discomfort or future challenge.
I think we forget there's a lot of stuff we allow to go onto autopilot in our world, whether it's at home or at work, in a relationship, or in seeking a new client or a new assignment within our organization, whatever the case may be. And unless we are constantly diligent and intentional about what we are doing and knowing where we are working on our tenacity and our resilience and our comfort zone, we're going to end up being behind before we ever get started, unless we're doing those other things all the time.
Right. Yeah.
Building tenacity, working on those muscles, stuff like that.
Absolutely. Challenging your comfort zone teaches you that you're good enough. And that was something that really helped me, because I believe that most people in the world are constantly trying to seek validation and constantly trying to seek value. So like value to the world, like people just want to know that they're good enough. I teach classes in public speaking, and the thing that comes up constantly is that people aren't scared of public speaking. It's not the act of speaking publicly that scares them. It's the feeling of not being good enough while doing it. So I have been in situations where, had I not purposely put myself in these uncomfortable situations and proven to myself that I am good enough and that I can do these things, I think I would have quit. And the first one that comes to mind is I was 24 years old. So I decided I would do a team building. I would launch a team building adventure. So through a crazy chance, I got to take out a small team of real estate agents who are, it was a multi-million-dollar real estate agency. And here I am, 24 years old, renting a van, putting all these people inside the van and taking them out to a remote location, taking their cell phones, and then putting them through a bunch of challenges. And I remember as I was driving the van, I went, picked them up, and as I was driving the van and everybody was kind of talking, I was freaking out. I was sitting there like, what am I doing? This is crazy. Like, I'm just some kid. I'm 24 years old. I don't know anything about making millions and millions of dollars through real estate. Like, what am I doing? This is crazy. And then that little part of me that had come up so many times before, whether it was taking a cold shower or jumping off a cliff into water, or simply talking to strangers or buying someone's groceries, all those different experiences kind of came to me, and I was like, wait a second, I can do this because I can do anything. I've practiced this before. And so putting ourselves in these little bits of uncomfortable situations on purpose, it just teaches us that we're good enough, that we can, and that we're capable.
Yeah. And self-love is a big element. And I like to hear you say that, one, as a man, because it's really interesting to hear you talk about and recognize that even you, and so that means everybody, because people tend to talk about self-love and self-care in terms of women. And I think that is unfortunate, because there is an element of love of self that has to occur, this enoughness that without it, men can't do what they want to do, just like women can't do what they want to do, until we feel like every ounce of our being feels like we are enough. We can do this. Interesting. Absolutely. And then we've got this, so vulnerability. Okay, we could go there, but then we'd spend a whole other hour, I'm sure. And I liked that you shared an example of when you did that, you loved yourself up into this position. And I'm listening to you, I was like, oh yeah. And for me, I like the future. So the stuff that happened in the past is all right. It's not useful to me anymore, except for to go, yeah, I've done that. Or, yeah, that didn't go the way I wanted. Or, yeah, but to spend a whole lot of time analyzing doesn't really help me. It's just like, okay, I can do what's next. I can do what's next. But there are people, and I don't know which you relate more to, that like that reflection, right? That they like the reflection, to know what's going on, to dissect that, to really re-experience and pull strength from it. I wonder if that's also something when you hear somebody speak on this topic, if you're way out in the front, like I'm listening to you and I'm listening to you tell that story, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've got stories like that, but could I recall them right now? Probably not, because I'm already thinking about what can I do next to have a similar situation where I'm going to be challenged and know that. And other people are listening to you going, oh, look at all the strength that I have because of all these things I've already done. I want to take a couple of minutes and I want to apply this to a business role. So we're somewhere on our career path. People that are listening, they're on their career paths. And I had mentioned being intentional and always practicing and always doing something so that when an opportunity arises, we are ready to step up and show that we are ready. And to say we're ready, even if we don't really 100% feel it. We've done all the steps. We've been intentional around it. So what would your advice or suggestion be to those people to make sure that that the way that they're practicing this uncomfortableness, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, will allow them to see new opportunities that might not otherwise become visible to them? And notice I didn't say given to them. I said visible to them.
Absolutely. Okay, so the moment you shift your perspective and start to see the world more like a laboratory, then every new experience you have has the potential to lead to infinite other new experiences. So it might be your first time taking your baby steps into a comfort challenge, doing something as simple as buying someone's coffee at the coffee shop that you go to. And you decide, you know what, I'm not going to do a random act of kindness. I'm not just going to tell the barista, like, here's $5 for the person behind me and then leave. I'm going to actually turn around to the person behind me and I'm going to say, hi, I'd like to buy your coffee today. I don't have a reason for it other than I just want to do something nice for somebody. Doing that small little conversation for a lot of people, and for me too, can be difficult. So let's say you do that and that's your first comfort challenge. You're like, you know what, today I'm going to do it. I'm going to buy someone coffee and I'm just going to go for it. And you do it, you turn around. I mean, the potential of that conversation is infinite, because it could be someone who happens to be in the same field as you. It could be someone who likes your same interest, you know what I mean? So it could become your potential romantic partner. It could become your new boss. It could become someone who connects you to someone else who then becomes your new boss or your new romantic partner or a new work opportunity or a new client or whatever it is. And I mean, it's just, right? So, I mean, it blows my mind to think about how in every moment, there's the possibility for infinitely more moments. Like, so in every little moment that we have, like I said, it could be as simple as saying hello to a stranger. That could change the course of the future. And I'll share a story that I read, and it's one of those ones that it sticks with me. I read it in a book. The book's amazing. I'll share that after. But basically, there was this teenager, grew up in San Francisco, 17 years old. And he was depressed. He didn't want to go on with his life. He wanted to be done with his life. He woke up one morning. He decided, you know what? I am going to take the bus to the Golden Gate Bridge and I'm going to jump off unless one person acknowledges me. One person, gives me a smile, says hello, something like that, acknowledges me for my existence. Then I won't do it. He got onto the bus. He took the bus. I think it was an hour all the way to the Golden Gate Bridge. No one said anything to him. He gets off the bus. People are walking all around him. No one's saying anything. And just as he's about to jump, someone taps him on the shoulder. He turns around thinking that he's saved. However, the person who tapped him on the shoulder just said, hi, will you take my picture? So he ended up jumping, and through a crazy event, he actually survived the jump. And a SEAL came and kept him afloat long enough that the Coast Guard could come and rescue him. And when he was talked to later and interviewed, that's how he was able to share the story of, like, all I was looking for was compassion. All I was looking for was acknowledgement of my existence. And if someone had just said hello. And so he kind of shares this story to let people know the power of something so seemingly insignificant, like a smile to a stranger, but yet that could have saved his life. And so I love the idea that, again, in these many moments, there's the potential for miracles.
I have tears in my eyes because I've seen parts of that interview video. Doing some things, different trainings. And Yes. And we get so wrapped up. Okay, so let's go back to conflict. If we're so wrapped up in ourselves and our own internal conflict, and we're so wrapped up in ourselves and our own inner conflict that we can't really acknowledge the world around us, we're going to have more conflict between us and others. And there's this dynamic that will occur. And then it's actually, I don't know if it's really like a figure eight, but it feels like this because you have all this stuff going on in one direction here, and then it's going to change direction and over here, but it's all in the same vortex, if you will. And so the acknowledgement of ourself, this young man, he said, hey, I'm really sure this is what needs to happen. I'm pretty sure about this. However, I will give myself an out because I have faith and I have hope in some capacity. And his hope was crushed. But then the seal, I have to tell the seal turned out to be the hope. And so in this case of possibility, we don't know where that possibility will come from. What we can do is we can always know that there is hope. And so this concept of connection to others and just making an effort for eye contact, making an effort to, even if you don't want to touch anybody, that's fine. Just to stand next to somebody and actually be casual about it and put the energy that you're putting out to be a little less standoffish would be maybe a good word, or aloof, because it's in those tiny moments, I think that you're right, that hope is not only built, but it is shared.
Can you say the last part real quick?
Sure. That hope is not only built, right? It's also built for ourselves, but shared with another. So we're perpetuating out that concept of possibility.
I completely agree. And I love that you talked about the 8 as the infinity symbol. Well, it's a sideways 8. And I think that's intentional for a lot of reasons. One, if it was an 8, a vertical 8, so the infinity symbol looks like an 8, right? Sideways. Mm-hmm. But if it was standing up like an 8, it would imply that, I like to think about the two circles that are coming together. Well, those two circles, let's say they're people. And so if you are one of the circles above someone else, well, it implies that there's a hierarchy and that you're above people. But when we tilt it on its side, you see that both circles are aligned. Both circles are playing at the same level. However, if you remove the center piece where the connection happens in the 8, and you just have two circles. So when people aren't open to connection, when people mean mug and shoulder shrug and blow people off, whether it's because of lack of eye contact or not smiling or not saying hello or making mean faces or whatever, they're creating that circle and they're just going round and round and round and round on their own little circle. But the moment we start to open that and seek out other people and see the abilities and that can happen from connection, well, it opens our circle. And if other people have open circles, that's where that connection happens in the midpoint of the infinity symbol. So you actually get this flow. I like to think of it, you go from this individual kind of hamster wheel to a beautiful, harmonious flow and connection between, you and another person. Or the way I see it is the infinity symbol is really about all things connected, right? All things connected at the same level and in a state of flow or in a state of connection.
We're coming toward the end of our hour, and I really don't want it to end. The last time we talked, I told you, I was like, this is going to be a 15-minute conversation. And I don't remember how long we were on the phone, but we were on the phone a long time. This concept of bridging communication, seeking out new experiences, and the fact that is building our connection is something that we can use when we're putting our filter on and we're getting just right down and dirty and we're planning our budget for the next month or quarter. It also could be when we're evaluating where we were last year and where we are now and what we want to change for the year ahead, or the period of time ahead. It's also something that we can use when we are having a conversation that we think is going to be hard, because now here we are, we've given it some sort of value, some sort of standard. And how are we going to show up to that and be open to the fact that it might not be as difficult as we thought, that it could actually be just us getting in our own way of a sense. And I want to know, when we're talking about all this, if you could distill it all down and tell us, why it's bold to acknowledge and embrace conflict.
I think I'll I'll share a story as kind of the ending here, because it's something that I live by, and it comes straight from my dad, who passed away recently. But he was a tree doctor, right? Fascinating job title. And as I was growing up, I would tell people like, yeah, my dad was a tree doctor. And they're like, what? I was like, yeah, that's just what he is. But he constantly shared kind of life lessons through trees as metaphors. So if you think about yourself as a tree, and you grow and you have these roots in the ground, well, that's your comfort zone. You are rooted is exactly where you are when you're comfortable. You feel like you're familiar, you feel like you're connected, you feel connected to, where you are. You feel like you're safe, you're secure, because that's where your roots are. But what happens to a tree if it never gets transplanted? Well, it just stays right where it is. So and the craziest part is that a tree, when it's transplanted, so it's pulled up from the ground and put in a different location with better soil, with better resources, with more plants around it, it has the potential to grow stronger and bigger. And so I loved that idea. I think it's it builds on the idea of the big fish in the little bowl, the big fish in the little pond, right? As you get a bigger lake, a bigger body of water, the fish can grow and really can become who it truly is and what it's capable of. Well, it's the same thing with a tree, right? If you grow a tree in an okay environment with a little bit of sun, it grows, it's resilient, it's strong, it'll grow enough. But if you want to see true growth and you want to see what it's truly capable of, it's going to take pulling that tree out of where it is, putting it into a new environment with new soil, new fertilizer, other plants around it, more sunlight, maybe less sunlight, whatever it is. By putting it in that different environment, you're going to see how it has the ability to really shape in new ways. Now, of course, if you move it to a space that's less productive or less successful or less apt for growing a tree, so you take it out of where it is, you put it inside with no light, no soil, no fertilizer, you don't take care of it, you don't water it, well, it's not going to grow, it'll just die, right? And I think that's what happens to a lot of people as they start to get into it. And it happened to me too when I started to read self-help books and listen, watch documentaries. I kind of tried to fix my life every moment of every day. I was thinking about everything. I was like, okay, well, if I do this thing, and if I do this thing, and if I do this thing. But what I was doing is I was taking myself as a tree and I was putting myself into this very chaotic environment where, people are walking on the soil and the sunlight sometimes shows, but sometimes doesn't. And the air isn't as, pure, whatever it is. For me, I put myself into an environment where it wasn't the most productive for growth. And so that's when I started, as I wrote this book, as I became a professor and I started to learn more about communication and really psychology through communication, I learned that it's not about just challenging yourself for the sake of challenging yourself. It's about challenging yourself in a positive direction. So it's about putting yourself into that more positive environment or that more productive environment, whatever it is that causes you to grow unlike you ever have before.
You heard it here, ladies and gentlemen, everybody watching and listening to the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Kevin Corcoran Jr. is our amazing and special guest today. And I want you to all think of yourselves as a tree and what your tree environment is, because this is a really good metaphor. And what are you going to do to move your tree to a place that will allow you to thrive a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. And before you know it, you're in that figure eight turned sideways for the infinity loop of possibility and hope and excitement and being unstoppable. You are listening to program 117, the conflict between connection and disconnection. You'll find all the program notes at thevoiceofboldbusinessradio.com/p117. It's through our experiences that we're defining what leadership and being an active and effective leader means today. And after listening to Kevin and I have this conversation, take a moment and figure out a story that you can share where you extended out beyond your comfort zone into something new and what the result was. We want to hear about that. Conflict is necessary for growth. And it is the midpoint between connection and disconnection, not only internally, also between us and those that we surround ourselves with. Thank you, and see you next time.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.